the University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
So without further ado, I'm going to share the slides, and please, you don't have to take notes. Just maybe the issues you want clarity on, and maybe for issues of questions. Otherwise, you're going to have this this presentation, yeah. So yes, and here we go. And please, you can interrupt if my network is breaking, but otherwise, I'll monitor it myself as well. And then, yes, I've used this graphic that I got, which I like, and I hope colleagues can explain to me this concept of brown bag and what is inside the brown bag. And in fact, I do suspect what is the concept about, but it can have many connotations. But I've used it because our logos appear on it, very nicely set up, and of course with the linkage and so on. Now, I've been requested to present on demystifying the DHET submission of research outputs process. That part is really simple because we've been working on this process for a while, and it's just going to be easy to explain it. However, there is background to the process, and that background is funding of the system. So I would like then, therefore, go back and start with funding. And the other thing I have assumed here is that none of the colleagues from the DHET had presented to you about the funding. And yes, I'm sure many of you would be familiar with it, but some of you may have not been made familiar with it. And so I will go back there and then start from there and drill down to the funding of research and how then the process works. And so I may be a bit slower in the initial slides, but I hope I'll be a little bit fast with the slides that follow. So just starting with the funding, the funding framework itself, and of course policies that inform the funding system that we are having. So it's the funding framework it's called the funding framework, by the way, the funding of public higher education system, which was required after '94, but then the first time we have the current system, the current funding system, it came about in 2003, but of course there have been revisions, but the foundation was laid by the policy, the white paper of 1997, and then the funding policy framework itself of 2003, and then with some revisions as we go along. One revision came about around 2012, and then we're still going with the same funding framework. The framework itself, the fundamental blocks or building blocks of the framework do not change. What changes is some areas that require funding now and again, but which are not originally part of the funding framework. For example, the infrastructure, and we'll get to some of the details of these examples. So, right towards the end, the two last bullets there. I'm not going to go through all the other details, but those details explain exactly what I've just said. And then the last two bullets are about that building framework of our funding system. The block grants, and which are the university council controlled, or if you like, the management, but of course, the council accounts for the use of those funds that the system that the government is giving a subsidy to the institutions. So all the universities receive the funding from government in that format. So there will be a block grant. So if you are receiving 100 Rand, part of that 100 Rand will be a block grant, and then part of it will be the earmarked grant. And earmarked, exactly what it means, it's earmarked for a particular purpose and cannot be used for any other thing other than the purpose for which it is earmarked. The block grant can be used anyhow by the council and as the council deems fit. And of course, the institutions then still account for all these funds and in the form of the reports, the annual reports that the institutions submit to the department, and that is at the end of each June. So it will be the due date for the accounting for the use of funds. So that's the building block of it, the framework. I don't know now why my slide is stuck. Okay, we're moving. This is how graphically it is presented. I hope this is not blocking your way. I'm trying to remove it here. I don't know how to reduce it, but I will. It doesn't matter. But anyway, this is the funding, the university funding of 2002, 2003, the current one. And 2002, 2003, it means from April of 2002 to 1st April 2002 to 31st March of 2023, next year. So this is the current one. The system, so yes, I think the system is correct term here, and then I'll explain what I mean then by the system, is in receipt of 77.1 billion Rand. And that is then the money, how it's broken down. The block grant that I explained earlier is 51% of that 77.1 billion Rand. And then the earmarked grant is 10%. And then at the bottom, you will see NSFAS, 29.4 billion, and that's 38%. So if you add up all those percentages, then they will take you to something like 99%, and then the other 0.1% is made up of the rounding up of the numbers. So we will follow both colors. We will just dispense with the bottom one, NSFAS and entities. And entities would include the Council on Higher Education, for example, National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences. So those monies then, would just go directly to those institutions without us having to do anything about those, because those are percentages anyway, and then allocated directly from National Treasury. So we don't mind on what is happening for now, at least on this presentation, with what is happening at the bottom. So that one is off. So we'll focus on the blue and on the green. The block grant and the next slide will explain further, but it's made up of the teaching input, the teaching outputs. Teaching inputs, really, those students who come and enroll at the institution. Teaching outputs, those who become graduates after you have enrolled them. And then research outputs, which is what we are going to be talking about. And the institutional factor grants. Institutional factor, we're not going to discuss. Safe to say, is the monies that goes to the institutions on the circumstances of those institutions. For example, we had institutional measures in 2003, 2005, and some institutions still have consequences of those and have got to be supported based on the fact that they had to. Well, I don't want to use the word suffer here, but it comes quickly in my mind. But had to suffer because of the measures, but it's not like that necessarily, but it's just to support the institutions to get by with the institutional measures. So that would be the institutional grant. We'll talk a little bit more about the teaching input and teaching output, and then the research is going to be our focus. So just note that it goes for block grant. It doesn't go as earmarked grant. So once it's with the institution, then it's at the discretion, and hence also the word there, discretionary, is at the discretion of the council and not the discretion of the department. The earmark grant also, we're not necessarily going to discuss that, but I will just look at the, well, maybe just explain a little bit, and also especially in relation to the university capacity development, which this program is part of. But yes, there are monies that are linked to this and not just the percentages. And maybe, I don't know now, why is my machine stuck? Yeah, there we go. So those are the monies that relate to those allocations. So of the, let me just go back to the block grant, of the 39.6 billion rand, 24.5 goes to teaching, 7.5 to teaching input, 7.5 to teaching output. And then what we're going to be talking about is that 5.2 billion rand. And then, of course, I've already spoken about the institutional factor, which is 0.4 billion rand. Now, the earmarked grants, infrastructure, I've made the example of that, new universities, that includes, by new universities, that mainly is Sol Plaatje University and the University of Mpumalanga. Those universities are still very much in their development phase. I don't know, I don't think there's anybody who knows how long that development phase is, but certainly they are developing. Only 9 years now, to be 10 years next year since their establishment, that is in 2013. So I think there's still a long way really before maybe a special support in the form of earmarked grants at those institutions. And that to some extent also includes their infrastructure. So therefore that infrastructure above those, infrastructure and efficiency, doesn't necessarily include the infrastructure of those two new universities. I said to some extent, there are also two other new universities that are still in the offing and still a long way to go. Feasibility studies, as I understand it, they have just been completed. But you may have heard about those in the news. University in the East Rand in Gauteng, and a university in Hammanskraal, that's north of Pretoria. So yes, to some extent, those would be small amounts of monies really at this stage, and nothing much. A drop in the ocean if you compare with what is there currently, 1.9 billion rand. Now, the foundation provisioning, you'll be familiar with that at the universities, extended program in certain instances, that's how it's known for the students. And that is accessed by almost all the institutions. And then veterinary sciences, as you know, we've only got one faculty in the country, and clinical training grant to the institutions that have that component in their offerings of clinical training. And then the Sibusiso Bengu Development Grant started as the HDI grant, historically disadvantaged institutions grant, and then it was named Sibusiso Bengu Development Grant. So it's still the same thing. There are 8 universities that were identified as historically disadvantaged, and therefore that is the grant that goes to those institutions. So all these monies, especially on the earmark grants, but also including the teaching output grants, the block grant, all these monies are fluctuating in a sense, but not up and down necessarily. So this is just the monies for this year, this financial year. And maybe next year when we have a slide like this, there will be some increases based on inflation in certain instances, slightly decreases in some instances because the the targets were or would have been achieved for those, and not necessarily to mean that they are going down and therefore not going to be going up again. So that's what I meant by fluctuation to some extent. And of course, the system has the stability, especially if we're talking billions of rands. You would need that kind of stability, and it will be just the decimals, that are changing, and not the major amounts. University Capacity Development Grant, just take note of it. I will talk to a slide on that one, and the Future Professors Program is part of the University Development Grant. So this is what we are having as the funding of the system. And as I said, please note that research output grant, that's what we're going to be talking about. That's where we are going to, and that 5.2 billion rand at a later stage. So how does it work in terms of the allocation to the institutions? Now, remember, we're talking the block grant now, and we put aside the EMR grant altogether. It has got a formula. So block grant is based on a formula. And what we are having here, it's not been revised really. So, but from year to year, it will be published, as a reminder, I suppose. So what we are having here in the heading 2020, 21, 21, 22. But as I say, not much of a need really to say 22, 23, because it stays the same. So this slide, this table, yes, it appears as table 4 in the ministerial statement on funding of the university. So what happens is that every year, towards the end of the year, and sometimes it does happen that the statement is a bit late, and it comes out, or it goes to the universities at the beginning of the year. But at the end of the year, the ministerial statement on the funding of higher education institutions is then sent to the institutions on the breakdown of the funds that will be accrued by the institutions, all the funds, block and earmarked grants. So this grid, as we call it, it appears as table 4 in that. So if you want to make a cross-reference with that, you will find it as table 4. And then I think the next slide also has got another table. So it comes from the ministerial statement. So this is the grid with 1 to 4 groups of fields of study, and it's all 20 of them as they appear in the NQF. And so the fields that are in group 1 are the fields that are less funded than the fields that are in group 4, or you can call them subjects, if you like, than those in group 4. And the reason basically is just the requirement of investment, the input, the costs that are required to invest in those fields. So there's less, for example, in education and law and so on, than there is a requirement in agriculture, agricultural operations, visual and performing arts. And the reason is because of the equipment, the resources generally required to have those programs offered by the institutions. So they require quite a lot of investment. You can think of agriculture, for example. You can't teach agriculture without having a farm. So which means therefore the institution must buy a farm, and then you can't have a farm and claim to have a farm if you don't have fields for crops and also for and animals. And then you must maintain those chemicals, equipment to maintain those, and all that and all that and all that. Whereas for education, law, psychology, and so on, what mainly do you need would be a library, a well-resourced library, and a few other resources, but not as much as those that are in group 4. That's the difference here. And then, of course, anything in between. Now, this is around the input to the institution. So when I said, therefore, the teaching input and the teaching output, I think my machine also is a bit sluggish here. I don't know whether it's this network problem. Fine, we have moved. So this is the input, the teaching, the funding weightings that is now on the basis of the formula that is being used. And again, I said, you know, table 6, you will cross-reference that table 6 with the ministerial statement, annual ministerial statement on the funding of higher education institutions. So these are the weightings of those groups, 1 to 4, and therefore the outputs therefore of those graduates from the 1 to 4 in the grid in the previous slide. It's a pity now, you know, I'm not able to just go back quickly so that I can show you the link between those. I will be able to do so soon. Let me just finish this slide because I can see our electricity is coming back here. So this will be, for example, the teaching outputs on undergraduate certificates and diplomas, which are 1 year. It will be a weighting of 0.5 units. So we're starting to use units now, and then we'll convert those units to money. So if you've got a piece of paper, then it's something that you can do your own calculation so that you see how then this funding gets allocated to institutions. I will show you the rand value of a unit, and this rand value will differ, and I will explain that. So 0.5, 1 for certificates, diplomas, 3 years, and then undergraduate first bachelor's degree, 1.5, NQF 7, NQF 8, 1.5. And then, so that's how it goes. And what you will see missing here are master's and doctoral degree or graduates. And then that will come when we talk about research, because mainly, not entirely, but mainly those would then be allocated as research. I'm saying not entirely because teaching masters is allocated differently from the research masters. So then these will be the units, these will be the, yes, units accrued by those degrees. Now, the difference here, I just don't want to leave it and assume, and of course, as you can see, if it's a certificate 1 year only, there is not much that the institution will require compared to a 3-year qualification, for example, or a 4-year qualification. So the longer the student stays, then the more investment is required for that student to complete his or her degree. So you will see this slide. It has skipped while I was trying to scroll there. Same funding groups. These are the inputs. What I was talking to in this other slide are the outputs. So now we talking these are the outputs, and so these are the inputs. So as you enroll them, this is once you enroll them, of course, then you get the subsidy that you claim from the institution, and then it depends on where the student is, in which at what level of the grid. Sorry, that I didn't do. Yep, there we go. So for instance, if it's on grade 1, that's the subsidy they will accrue, and whether distance or contact student. So I had an opportunity to explain this slide a little bit further with one of the HDIs, and just for them to understand, for example, if they don't have a program or programs at grade level 4, it then means therefore that they attract lower amounts of subsidy at grade level 1, 2, and 3. And then of course, depending on how many students they attract at grade level 4, then of course that's the subsidy that the institutions accrue. So that explains the differences or the nuances in the funding of the system and how the students are allocated funding. And of course, that's how it is, colleagues. You know, HDIs don't have much of students at grade level 4, or let me say, not have much of programs or qualifications at level 4, but mainly on 1, 2, and 3. Yes, a little bit on 4, and therefore will attract less funding in relation to the to subsidy for those students. Now, that also explains why then do you have an HDI grant to try and balance this. And of course, it's based also on what the institutions would like to do. And so they would submit their proposals and then get funded for those projects. To some extent, you know, just to work on balancing. This is a historical fact, and not just necessarily that's how the subsidy works, but also it's even if this was not the subsidy that we were using, it's a historical fact that some institutions were barred from offering programs at level 4. You know, you don't find engineering, for example, at the HDIs. They were not allowed to, not because they could not, they were not allowed to offer engineering. So it's our history. So then we move on. So I've already touched on this one, so I don't need to repeat on this. Now, then when I said, please just keep the note of the units, they are there at the bottom. The current RAND value for a teaching input funded unit is 15,713, and for the teaching output funded unit for a 3-year qualification, you will remember that there are qualifications that are less than 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, and 0.5 and 1 unit or 0.5 units, each one of them. And then, of course, you will then divide that 34,215. Yes, I could not have this slide updated, and that's just because of the delays of ESCOM. But otherwise, you can use these numbers. Usually, there is not much of a change or a big difference between what is now there as 2021, 2022, and what would have been 2022, 2023. You may find that these are exactly the same numbers. Nothing has changed. So this one is a bit historical as well. It goes to 2004, 2005 TIU, teaching input unit, and then graduate headcount. So teaching input, and then the graduate would then be the output. And then, of course, then I said there are masters that we are not going to be talking about. These are the masters graduate headcount output at the institutions, but this is for the whole system. So yes, you can work on that one. And then I said we will talk a little bit about the University Capacity Development Grant, the UCDP that was at bottom in the green part of the funding. So which means therefore the earmarked funding grant. These are the programs under the University Capacity Development Program. So it's these 5 of these at the top here, the columns, and then the 2 at the bottom, the Staffing South African University Framework and the Supplementary Staff Employment Program. That one is not so much of a standalone program, but a program to assist the one in the middle, University Staff Doctoral Program. So if a staff member has taken off to go and complete a PhD or a doctoral program, then the Supplementary Staff Program will kick in so that the university can employ in place of that, temporarily, of course, in place of the academic who has taken sabbatical. Now, these are the programs, yes, that you are familiar with. This is what we are about today, the Future Professors Program. And then we're working with USAF, University South Africa, on the implementation of leadership and management program, HELM or HELP in this case. So I don't need to explain this one. So we'll go to the research outputs now. Again, we're going back to the blue part of the funding framework, which means the block grant, and particularly the research output. So now this is basically the start of the topic as I was provided or requested to present, and this demystifying part of it, of how it works. Of course, it's based on policy, and that policy going back, and this is a little referenced or little used paper, white paper. This white paper came in 1995, and if you are not a millennial, you will know, of course, and have experience of 1995, because it was just shortly after the elections, first democratic elections, but before the constitution of the country, because the constitution comes in 1996, and then the Higher Education Act comes in, and the white paper 3, the next bullet, comes in 1997. So there was a white paper on education broadly, which explained basically what our education system is going to be about, and what are the targets it should meet, and what should South Africa benefit from our higher education system. So it said it should be higher education should sustain a sophisticated modern economy and financial infrastructure, industrial, business and communication technology, medical, legal, media, cultural, and other professional services, which compared well with other industrializing countries. Now, the reason I'm having this here is not just because, you know, it kind of sounds, yeah, very good and so on, but it was a recognition of what our higher education system, in particular, the capacity it has and what it had achieved at the time. And therefore, it was about retaining what we have and then working towards transformation into what we would like to have, but without getting rid of what we have. So, for example, that's why we wouldn't just get rid of the institutions that we had, which with their disparities that they had, but rather work on uplifting the institutions that were left behind. So the white paper, when it came, the white paper 3, that white paper, that's the reference here. If you're going to be Googling it, that would be the reference you would use, the white paper of 1995. And then the white paper 3, and that's the title, A Program for the Transformation of Higher Education. It came in 1997. And that's the white paper we still use to date and still relevant, depending on which part of it you are looking at, because it's quite comprehensive. In this case, we would be looking at the parts that are relevant to research, and therefore how then do we fund research moving forward. And that moving forward, it was from 1997 forward. So paragraph 4.26 of it says prices per student place at research levels of learning, typically master's and doctoral studies, will include the cost of research supervision, infrastructure, and consumables integral to research, but not project costs per se. So remember now, when we were talking teaching inputs, that you would have more funding for students at grade level 4 than for students at grade level 1. So that is part of this, that it's also in compensation of the consumables that the institution will incur in having that student at grade 4 or at the institution or in that program. And of course, typically, of course, you know, research would be at master's and doctoral level, but it's good, of course, to have honors level also starting to do research.
And then the last bullet, paragraph 4.31, the funding formula should include provision for the recognition of measurable research output. So that's exactly why we are doing what we are doing in the way that we are doing it. And that is, we measure the research and then fund accordingly, according to the measurement that we use. And the measurement we use here, it may not be perfect, is the research publications from the institution. So by research publications, you know, those publications that have been peer reviewed, and then the artifacts or creative outputs from the institutions, whether it's artifacts or, you know, the performances and so on from the institutions. Then we are also funding that. That one is relatively new, and I will explain it now. So from the white paper 3 of 2007, then we developed a research outputs policy, formerly known as the measurement of research outputs of public higher education institutions, that was developed and published in 2003. And then we revised it in 2017 and also even changed the title in 2017 to Research Outputs Policy, which is the policy we're talking about now. So shortly, you can just say publications outputs, because the other policy, the second one, the policy on evaluation of creative outputs and innovations produced by public higher education institutions, that came for the first time in 2017. You can just roughly refer to that one as creative outputs policy. So when we're talking creative outputs policy, you would know what we're referring to. And when we are talking about publications outputs, you would refer that what we are talking to. So since 2003, therefore, we've been having that publications outputs, and effectively it came into place in 2005. 2003 is also the same year that the institutional measures started, and yes, there was data, there was funding to the institutions, there was data generated, but effectively we started in 2005 and started to have the reports that Andrew, you referred to earlier on, started to have them in 2006. And we've been having those reports, very good to read, and of course, a valuable source for the institutions. So their strategic objective is to sustain current research trends. In relation to that old policy that I referred to, the education policy of 1995, sustain current research trends, and to promote the kinds of research and other knowledge outputs required to meet national development needs. This is I think it's good in theory indeed, but also in practice, but I don't think we are strong in practice on this one. I think we can do better as the system. And maybe those are the things we need to be looking at moving forward. How can we do better? How can we sustain what we have? How can we introduce new areas of research that is, and how can we advance them and develop those areas, both the old and the ones that we would have identified. And their purpose, the last bullet, is to enhance and encourage research productivity, the use of relevant academia proxies, for example, peer review, is used to determine the quality of such outputs. And then drilling deeper now on into the research publications outputs. So the policy requires that on an annual basis, institutions submit their research outputs to the institutions, and that these are textual in terms of the publication. These are textual outputs published either in approved journals. We've got 6 indexes that we have approved, and we keep on adding on those indexes, and they are very comprehensive. I have never really sat down and counted how many journals are we recognizing from those. Where Web of Science alone would have in excess of 25,000 journals. The Scopus, also some around the same number. And then IBSS, these are the indexes, therefore, that we have recognized or approved. IBSS still about 3,000 and so. And then we also have our own list of South African journals, which is about 200 local journals. But those other indexes, those overseas indexes, they've got local journals in them. So we remove it from our list if it's in the international list. So you will only therefore be recognized if your publication appears in one of these indexes that have been that are approved by the department. And the reason is simple, is that those indexes, they've got systems to approve quality journals. Yes, their systems may not be watertight, they may not be 100%, and but it's something to work with, and it's something that is used internationally, of course, but also they are becoming very expensive. And so now also we have joined this movement of open access to journals. So for example, now recently, I think starting from last year, 2021, we then recognized, we included one of the bigger ones, or probably the biggest open access directory. It's called Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ. We've included it in as part of the indexes. Yes, we had one smaller one before. It's local as well, Cielo, South Africa. There is Cielo, Brazil, and I think there's another one somewhere, I can't remember. But then this one is the, if you like, the franchise of South Africa. It's run at ASAF. So they are the ones who are maintaining that one. It's still a relatively small in terms of the number of journals, but at least the information contained in the journals that they publish is freely accessible to anyone who wants to access it. Yes, it may not be really completely free to publish, but it's not at the exorbitant amounts that are charged by Scopus or by Web of Science and so on. And also we've got the Norwegian list, which is doing very badly in terms of South Africa. Very, very few publications appear in the Norwegian list. So after evaluating claim, so then that would be for journals, and then scholarly books. Again, still the scholarly books would be books that have been peer reviewed prior to publication, not post publication. And then published conference proceedings, and not conference proceedings that you went to a conference and then you presented and then your paper was not published, but published conference proceedings. In all of these, there are some tendencies of trying to maximize on the amount that the institutions are getting. So that is from the subsidy, and therefore, some practices that are unbecoming. I don't know what other word I can use here. Unbecoming practices, really, and then not good practices that the institutions get into. We've seen this growing slightly, and we are trying to deal with it. And investing, in fact, on us dealing with it. And it's something that one wishes that the universities themselves can really deal with this, because otherwise it undermines what we have become to know as scholarship, and therefore, works against scholarship. And now you would question the scholarship from the institutions because of those practices that the institutions indulge on, to maximize on the research subsidy from government. So it's something that we deal with. It's a big deal, but yes, it still affects about 3% of our research outputs or the investment, but 3% is 3% big enough to cause our concern for this and invest on working on quality publications. So after evaluating claims, institutions are then provided with research subsidy based on the number of approved publications. I'll show you the amounts and the units in one of the slides. And then added to this, the DHET provides research output subsidy for a number of doctoral degrees or PhDs, and then research masters and not taught masters. That's why, therefore, in the teaching output unit, you wouldn't see doctoral and masters there. It's because then they come here as part of the research funding. The 5.2 billion rand in that first slide that shows the subsidy system to the institutions. And then the DHET provides subsidy for higher education institutions and not for individuals. And this is important. And we always make this point because there is this tendency within the institutions, and that's borne about by the institutional policies and not government regulation or the department's regulation in this case, but the institutional policies which incentivize the individuals. And absolutely nothing wrong with incentivizing. But the way the institutions are doing that incentivizing sometimes, it really calls calls to question, of course, but also influences these bad practices that I spoke about. You know, for instance, giving large bonuses to individuals as personal perks and not necessarily as a research grant or access to research funds on the basis of your performance and so on. So those are some of the practices really we have got to deal with. And again, this is what I was personally, I hope the institutions can really deal with these issues. Don't allow government to get into regulating how you use the block grant, because this comes as a block grant. The moment then you allow for that loophole, then it encroaches on what we then know as the institutional autonomy, because institutional autonomy, part of it is how the institutions would make use of their block grant, and not necessarily then we come in when we have to deal with the earmark grant. But then the moment you allow for this, then you are opening a loophole for government to start encroaching into institutional autonomy. And it wouldn't be nice. We support institutional autonomy, and it wouldn't be nice for government to encroach into that space. So that is the publications side of things. Then the second policy, of course, is the creative outputs of it. We've got this debate in the creative outputs. We have it with the sector. Now, the sector that is the academics, and in all of this we are assisted by academics. So we appoint panels to do the evaluations. So academics from all our institutions, but not necessarily all of them, because we just have a limited number. For publications, for instance, we get the assistance of plus minus 50 academics from the system to assist with the evaluation of this. And then for the creative outputs, which came in 2017, this is the third round. So we started in 2019, and then first submissions, then 2020 were the second submissions, 2021 were the third round. So we're going fourth round now, and that fourth round, by the way, is due on the 30th of September, in the next few days. We'll also talk about that later on. But this is the debate, and when I think of this debate, to me, it's you know, it's the chicken and egg. You know, one moment you accept, you know, you settle chicken and egg, which one came first, you settle, but on another moment you question really which one really came first and so on. So it's an ongoing debate. Should we have it like that? I really don't know. I'm not uncomfortable with an ongoing debate as long as we improve on it. Whether the issue here is research vis-a-vis the creative outputs or artistic creations. Some academics feel that you know, creative work has got to speak for itself, and it cannot be judged by the department or experts in the field and therefore allocated subsidy on the basis of that. On our side, we're doing it for subsidy. At the moment, we have no other formula. We have no choice but to do it like that. Yes, maybe the argument sticks when it comes to just creativity and just as a standalone output at the institution, and therefore judged by the admirer and not necessarily by the funder. And in this case, we are not the admirer, we are the funder. And yes, we may admire, but admire for a purpose, and the purpose is to fund. So it's an ongoing debate, which we keep having. And yes, we do improve on the basis of that debate, but I don't think it will die down unless, of course, the whole formula changes. So what then happens is that the evaluation on the basis of the originality, the relevance, and the newness. Newness as in, for example, new research or new knowledge and so on. So we still fund the creative outputs or as the research outputs, because that's what is supposed to be happening at the institutions. If you then want to be creative, you can be creative elsewhere. And yes, you can still be creative at the university, but in this case, and in the generation, it should be in the generation of new knowledge, and hence that newness, and hence the relevance to the area, and relevance to intellectuality of that. So that is what is happening. Sorry, I knocked my, yes, there we go. And then in the creative outputs, remember, in the publications are counted journals, conference proceedings, and books. And then here, it's those 7 areas: fine arts and visual arts, music, theater, performance and dance, design, film and television, literary arts. And then we've got an area of innovations, and that would be patents that the institutions are developing. And then the second one under the innovations is plant breeders' rights, PBR. We've got a list of those where they are recognized and the countries in which they are recognized. And we are working with the National Intellectual Property Management Office in the assessment of those NIPMO. And then we've got sub-panels that assist us with all of this, including the innovations that is together with NIPMO. And most importantly, publications and creative outputs policies serve as tools for the distribution of research. This is something, again, that we come across a lot. I think also to some extent it's on the basis of the language we use. We would say, we're supposed to be saying allocation of subsidy, but because we do it against units or against submitted outputs, then we use, we slip into use of the language of award. And now the connotation, therefore, now it becomes the kind of award of, as in a prize, and not necessarily as in the allocation of research subsidy. And it lands us into this problem of institutions or academics thinking that if it has not been awarded, therefore it's not of quality, and it's not worth it out there. And of course, it then creates that tension within the institutions. And again, here, institutional policies are not assisting us, because this is just a formula to award subsidy, to allocate subsidy. And hence also it is to the institution and not to the individuals. But what then the institutions do internally is to award individuals. And therefore you get this unhealthy competition. If there was competition, it's fine, but it shouldn't be an unhealthy one. There are institutions that are doing it right, and therefore not allocating necessarily to the individual's pocket, but maybe to the individual's budget. And that budget will be used for further research, development of novice researchers, and development of students graduates, and so on. So that's why that point is important. And it's something, again, it goes back to the point I made about us giving us space to encroach into institutional autonomy, which I would say, you're supposed as the institutions to close the ranks and not allow any loophole for government to get into institutional autonomy. So the submission process of the creative outputs, the first creative outputs submissions. Okay, yes, I needed to clear my throat there. The first creative outputs were due 15 November 2019, and then each submission must be accompanied. That was the first one, the very first one we had. And then in the following years, we used that date, and then we changed later on. We'll talk about that later on. Each submission must be accompanied by 2 peer reviewers' reports from experts in the discipline or subfield. So taking, for example, in film. So if there is an academic who has produced an output in film, then the institution will choose 2 peer reviewers. In fact, we'll choose 3 that ideally we had wanted 3, but then the sector advised us that there are not enough experts out there. So we're using 2. So those 2 independently, if they approve, then that should be submitted to the department together with those peer reviewers' reports. We produced a template for the reviewers, and so therefore there's some kind of synergy and standardization of the input that is expected across the institutions, but also across the peer reviewers. The Institutional Research Office must consolidate the peer review reports. And then the 4th bullet there, the Institutional Internal Evaluation Committee must screen and verify the material in order to ensure policy compliance prior to submission to the department. So prior the research office submitting it to the department. But what is happening is that institutions skip that step. And so we get then to be loaded with information both for publications and creative outputs, with outputs that are not supposed to have been submitted by an institution. So if, for instance, reviewers did not give approval, then the institution is not supposed to submit it. But sometimes you find that we've got that kind of those kind of submissions to the system. I guess I don't know whether it's some kind of playing of lottery, or let's see what happens if they are going to notice and so on. Let's take our chance and so on. It shouldn't be a game of chances. It should be what the institution believes to be a submission of quality from that institution. Yes, I may say it like this as if it's a huge problem. It is when even one that we get, it is a problem. But in terms of a scale, it's not that big of a program, scale as in all the submissions from the system. But you got serial offenders here that would do that lottery, and then hoping that I guess pray that the department doesn't see and then submit. It becomes a nuisance because it takes our time. And then all claims must have a signature of either the VC or DVC or equivalent person to say that these are the claims to the institutions. This may become a big issue in future because of saying that trying to get rid of the nuisance, it would be about us then penalizing the institutions for submitting things that they are not supposed to submit. So it may cost an institution and just one unit. You've seen it with the inputs, and that's nothing. You will see when it comes to this one. But just docking 1 unit from an institution would be a big deal. And then acceptable submissions will be year N -3. So this is for the creative outputs. For the publications outputs, it's year N -1. So let me explain it here. I will use either n-1 or n-3. In the case of creative outputs, we allow for maturity of the output. And by maturity, I mean, for instance, it may be a performance that has been put out there that's going out, or it may be a film that has been produced and then get shown in the shows out there, get critical reviews and so on. In certain instances, those reviews even published, and then they become an issue or part of the portfolio that the institution submits. Unlike a publication that will have gone through a peer review process, and then once it gets published, it gets published. It doesn't matter, therefore, if it attracts critique and so on. And of course, when it attracts critique, there will be other people who publish against or for, or whatever the case is, on that publication, some of them local and some of them international. So not much of a big deal there, and hence n-1. So n, if you take year n to be 2002, so it will be a publication that appeared 1 year before. So 2022, I said 2002, sorry, 2022 -1 then would be 2021. So this year you submitted publications that appeared last year. And if it's late, and then it must come with motivation, and that late that we take on publications with a good motivation will be year n-2, which means it will be a publication in 2022 that appeared in 2020. Beyond that, we reject, and there's no even a discussion. And although some institutions would like to make it an issue, it's no longer an issue with us, and institutions can do whatever, but you know, that one is in the policy. In the case of creative outputs, it's year n-3. So this year in 2022, it will be the creative outputs. Of course, the institution chooses year. They may have appeared in 2021, they may have appeared in 2020, and they may have appeared in 2019, depending what the, you know, maybe there are some of those that once it appears, there isn't much really you are expecting from it. So if it was in 2021, it's fine, it can be submitted now. But we always advise institutions, focus on the outer year. So this year, focus on 2019, because you won't have a chance to submit 2019 again. And next year, your outer year will be 2020, and so on and so on and so on. So hence n-3 in this case, and n-1 in the case of creative of the publications. This is what a submission should be accompanied with. And again, it's still part of the debate, therefore, that we are having with the academics from the sector, where they have to have an annotation which motivates the output. If for instance, it was an artifact, you can admire an artifact where it is at, but when you are submitting it now as a research output, we want between 500 and 700 words that should be accompanying that to explain the contextuality of it, yes, the relevance of it in terms of research and so on and so on. You know, those categories that I showed you there. And then, of course, to peer reviewers and so on. We're doing online submissions. Fortunately, we started, but on a small scale before COVID lockdown. And I think we had about 2 years of experience by 2020 of submissions online in a system that's managed by NRF, the Research Output Submission System. We call it ROS. And of course, we're working with them in the development of it and advancement of it. And then, so when lockdown came, yes, we were not prepared for it. We also had no idea how long the lockdown would last. From March of 2020, we didn't know that by the time the submissions were supposed to be submitted, if we would still be under a lockdown. So, but anyway, we adapted quickly by July of that year and requested all submissions to be done online. We now continue that way. We're not going to change. So that's one of those benefits of the pandemic. Yes, sir.
This is Andrew here. Can I just appeal to you? We only have about 15 minutes before 17 hours.
Okay.
And perhaps if we could have even at least 10 minutes of question time, it would be most appreciated.
Yes, we will definitely have that. I'm moving towards the end here. I didn't realize it's that fast. Yes, I'm not going to explain this one. This one is self-explanatory, and as I said, you will have these slides. I just want to chase, for example, this one. This is the submission time period we've been having until this year. So it's always been, on paper, it was 30 November, but otherwise, sorry, it was 15 November, but then we allowed institution extension. But then we have changed this date of 15 November to 30 September. And then the rest of the dates, therefore, are going to follow as such. And of course, you know, we're piloting having changed the dates to allow us to interact more with the data that you have submitted and the analysis of that. So the impact, here we go. This is what you will see in our report. This is the publications report, the research outputs, starting from 2005, as I had indicated, to the current that we are having, the data we have currently in 2020. So without even explaining it, you can see that it's been growing. It's a healthy growth. And despite all the problems that we are having, little bit dips and downs here and there, but overall growing. I've just realized recently, because I've been wondering why this upward movement between 2017, 2018, 19, and 20 years, from 2019 and 20. And I couldn't figure it out, and it was there in my face, and that was the introduction of the creative outputs. And so they added here. We had not been having before then, before 2018, so they added from 2019. And then you will find that slide in our report. This one is the doctoral academics with doctoral degrees. And of course, those are a good indicator of research activity taking place at the institution, plus including the output on graduates, research graduate, masters and PhDs, because those are the people who supervise. We're coming from 30%, and that was a study done in 2008 by ASAF. They showed that we had 33.4%. But certainly, with us investing on research, then we have contributed to this upward movement. I'm really curious when we are going to be breaking 50%. So I don't know at this stage whether the 2021 data will have done that. But yeah, it's an area of curiosity for us. I guess psychological step. Basically, you know, having 50%. So this is the allocation of units. I showed you the input and output units, that 25,000 and 34,000 there. But here, with the research outputs, these are the units that accrue to each one of these that I've spoken about earlier on, including the research masters, which is 1 unit, and doctoral graduates, which is 3 units. This is where your multiplication error comes in. A unit in 2020 was 127,962. So you can multiply for a doctoral graduate, you multiply that by 3, and you get what the institution accrues by producing a doctoral graduate. That's the only one you will see in our report. We will say weighted, so which means there is a weight into it, and this is where it comes from, the weight of each of the doctoral graduates. And in certain instances, of course, it's just the head count. And then this is the money in this last slide. This is the money that we've been investing at least in the past 10 years on research outputs. This is the total amount, and these would be units under all of these, but then at the end, this is the total amount, and this is the rand value of each of these units. So you can multiply, for instance, this rand value by a conference proceedings and get the number of how much the conference proceedings from the system accrued in that year of this 2.7 billion rand in 2022. As you can see, 5.2 billion rand, remember in that funding slide, 5.2 billion rand of research, and this is what it's about. And at the bottom here is the introduction of the creative outputs. That will be it, Andrew. I'm sorry, I think I got carried away and didn't realize that we have moved that far. But yes, I absolutely like questions and discussion, and it makes us to improve on the work that we do. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very, very much. I'm sure my colleagues who are part of this particular conversation appreciate, because it always, and I like the title that we are demystifying. It always looks like a mystery to us. But without me spending too much time, let me ask if there are a number of questions and comments that colleagues may have for you. And as you indicated, the slides will be available for people to engage with at a later stage. Any questions? If you can raise your hands, and I'll then give you a chance to ask Mahlubi what you have. While people are thinking about it, Chief, what is, of course, you alluded to the counter problem. We were looking for good things, and then of course got into problems of salami, what we call in the system salami slicing, and or predatory journals and stuff like that. How have you dealt with these issues of especially salami slicing and or even the predatory journals, in order to avoid just wanting to publish and get subsidy?
Yes, thanks for that. It's one of those things that are shocking coming from the system. You go to the church and you expect holy people to be at the church. Similarly, here in academia, you come to academia, you expect holy people called academics, and then not expecting that there may be some of these bad practices, as I would like to call them. So in that bag of predatory journals, predatory publishing, salami slicing, some serial conferencing, I'll give you an example, and this is no exaggeration. There is a year where we had an academic from one of our institutions appearing in 148 conference publications. So certainly that academic did not go to that much. Otherwise, that academic would not have been at an institution. And the pretense here is that we are developing students, and so we give them a platform. So, but this is not where you are supposed to be claiming for that student. This is research money, and so on and so on. But taking the advantage of the fact that the policy is quiet on these, and then the policy, of course, was designed with the understanding that the academics would understand what this means for the system. So serial conferencing, salami slicing, where you literally see, even if you are not coming from that field, it can be engineering, it can be construction, whatever, where you can see that this is actually the same article that appeared elsewhere, and now it's appearing here, maybe with a change of title and change of some paragraphs, especially at the beginning and so on, but otherwise just the same thing. And so meaning that it's been cut thinly so that it appears in different publications, in a spread of publications. Hence, Salamis license. So we do see those, and then we deal with it. We withhold the units to the institutions, although the institutions do contest them, but also it's in certain instances just a matter of saving face, really. But we do pick them up. We are not 100% either, but we work on what is now ahead for me between in October is just to work on that for the publications that were made earlier this year, so that we can then produce a report. It would be nice for us to also produce a report that's quality report that is good reflection of our system. And these reports go widely, widely as in abroad as well, and also create a reputation for our country. And so if we then have that, you know, those practices, they undermine the system, they undermine the field from where those academics come. And indeed, you know, they undermine the reliance on the, you know, yes, on the reliance on the information that we are getting from our system. You know, it can call it to question, you know, the kind of academics we produce. But we work on those. We communicate with the indexes to remove the journals that we have picked up as predatory, and then we'd rather have those contestations, that is, with the publishers of those journals. But otherwise, when we pick them up, we get rid of them. Yes, there are mistakes also from the institutions where, for instance, they submit a thesis or dissertation as a book, and then we just regard that as a mistake, and then we remove it. We tell the institution this is the reason why we have removed it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's how we deal with those, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Colleagues, just a reminder that you will be requested to please just evaluate and or make comments. There is a link that Megan always puts up. If you can double check that when we finish. In the meantime, though, you know, there is a question from Zaid Wakit asking, you know, the fact that, of course, you can't predict income tax collections. But the question more specifically is what is the sustainability of you know, this particular, you know, program in terms of funding universities on the basis of subsidies, as it were. And then a follow-up question, you know, Mahubi, to that same one is there any thought about perhaps changing the, you know, and thinking about the level of unit award for particular journals? Again, you then differentiate between particular journals.
Yes, okay, yes. Starting with this one, with the tax and difficult to predict. No, it's not difficult to predict the amount that goes to universities. So this subsidy now this year was calculated 3 years ago, and on the basis of what the information we had at the time. And therefore, you know, there is now in 2022, you can almost be guaranteed that in 2025, this will be the amount that goes for research. But then, of course, then there are nuances and the actual number of outputs per institution and so on. So it's not that difficult to predict it. So it's a predictable, stable amount that comes to the university. It's just the smaller bits, smaller amounts. And then other things that temper with it. You know, when we had COVID-19 and the pandemic and so on, then there was a need of shifting certain funds. We protect it as much as possible, I must say.
Yeah.
And then, but then, you know, there would be certain amounts required elsewhere, and then shifting of funds here and there. But you can see in that slide, that table slide, that it has been growing over years. And then this other one of the impact, usually, yes, that's the terminology that's used, you know, higher impact journals and less impact journals. No, we don't want to go there. We would like our funding of research, and that's how the policy was set up, to be developmental, and therefore also means that to those academics who are not at the top of their fields, where they get invited to publish, but you want to give a space also for those who are starting, your novice researchers who are starting or learning to publish. So hence we have this, and of course the impacts are also questionable themselves, either the impact of the publication, the actual article, or the impact of the journal, the entire journal. So some of those are questionable. It's not to dismiss them. We are not dismissing them, but it's a question of saying that, no, let's be circumspect on the developmental part of the policy, but also on what an impact can be. And it can be a negative paper altogether that we have published, attracting a lot of negativity, and therefore a lot of other publications, and therefore having a lot of impact because of that. And yet it doesn't have the impact to society and so on, which is what is desirable from the research. So yes, so far, no, we are not considering the impact, but we haven't closed that. Usually it just comes as a question, it doesn't come as a suggestion. So if one day there will be a bomb of a suggestion that really changes our minds, yes, certainly something that we consider.
Thank you very much. We are just a little bit over, 17 hours. I don't know if the colleagues have got, I don't see anybody with the hand up, but, if there's some thought, maybe just one last question from myself again, Mashubi, I couldn't remember if you touched on, what does, in terms of the book value, in terms of the units, again, just to re-emphasize, because there was always a query about, of course, the journal articles and of course, what the book approaches. We have indicated what the doctoral, graduate does. What is the value of the book at the moment?
Yes, it's there in that slide. Thanks for that. A book can actually attract up to 10 units. So you can multiply that 127,000 by 10. And that's more than R1 million. But there are various permutations here. It's not always possible. Well, of course it's possible, but you don't get many academics who publish a complete book by themselves. So it will be a collection of other academics who have made a contribution in terms of chapters. And therefore we then break it down to chapters and how much a chapter is worth, and then again break it down to a number of contributors or authors of a chapter, especially if those authors of a chapter are coming from different institutions. Because remember here, the allocation is to an institution, not to the individual. So subsidy, therefore, will go to those institutions where the academics come from. So a book can attract up to 10 units, and then all these other permutations, therefore, will be fractions of that 10. So it's good to publish a book. And that's the reason why, anyway, we have weighted it like that. It came with the amendments we did in the policy in 2016. Before then, there was very little that was going to the books. And you can see with the books, they still about between 5 and 8% of the publications. And most publications go to journals in excess of 85%. Or even 90% journals. Yeah, so it's a way also of encouraging more publications in books by the academics.
No, thank you very, very much, Mashubi. I don't want to hold you and of course the colleagues who are here and participating. As I indicated, there is a link for the your evaluation. Will be most grateful if you could just indicate your comments and thoughts about the presentation. Again, the challenge with of course, as future professors, your challenge is also to get engaged in the debate of how we assess, the publications, the debate that we referred to, especially in the performing arts, that are continuing. And I think that's a critical part. I saw a quick hand. Let me just give one individual a chance. I think there was a hand and then somebody disappeared again. If there's a burning question, we could probably entertain that. I lost the name there.
It was me, Prof.
Matawo, go ahead, please.
Yes, I don't know whether this is the right platform, but I would like for the presenter to address the issue of peer review versus the promotion of new knowledge. How do we say it is new knowledge when we still need someone to say, yes, it is like this? So I struggle with the concept of peer review versus new knowledge.
Yes, yeah, that would be academics, but not necessarily not the right platform. It's still the right platform, certainly, because we develop our policies on the basis of the knowledge or the information that we are getting from the system. And the system, of course, includes the academics. Now, and it's similar, your question is similar to that of creative versus research. But this is the practice that we have become accustomed to in terms of scholarship, that the scholarship involves peer review, and that it involves you being promoted by others, and by others who have been there in the field before you. But then it doesn't stop you or them identifying what you have produced as new knowledge. And this is the target that a doctoral thesis would be targeting, that your doctoral thesis should be producing new knowledge, and that you then get supervised by the others who've been there before, the professors, for you then to produce that new knowledge. And for them to note and say that, yes, this is new knowledge, even whether you are aware that it is or you are not aware, but in their minds or in their experience, they would say that, yes, you have produced new knowledge. So in the same way that it's done there, that's exactly also the same way that the policy sees it, that it is therefore possible to produce new knowledge with even the people that have been in the system, guided by the theories that you are using, or even developing a new theory of looking at the things that you have looked at. I think that that's how I would respond to that. And yes, it may satisfy or not satisfy you, but I guess, you know, I'm also taking from what is the general practice, as I said, of our understanding of what scholarship is. And that's what the scholarship does, making use of those that have been there before us.
Thank you very, very much once again, colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention and, of course, your participation. As indicated, the slides will be shared with you. And of course, you know, if you can just complete that particular contribution in terms of input. And thank you very much.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.